Okay, so we were looking at hash tables, and we discussed a few things about hash tables briefly. So now let's look at the code. Actually, let me switch off my video. So at the start, you will realize that we are using chaining because we are using list.h, and that's one definite advantage of having ADTs, where we can have whatever this data structure we had created earlier, we could make full use of that in some other data structure. As an example, if you just go to list.h, this you'll see that this is exactly the same as we had, where there was a class node and then there was a class list, which had all these functions of print recursive, find, insert, find recursive, reverse, etc. Right? So it's exactly the same. And if you also notice, this file ends here. So the file contains only the class declarations. It doesn't contain any implementation of all these functions. That is added to a .cpp file. So this also gives you a good idea about how the code organization needs to be done, where we just include the .h and the actual code corresponding to this interface, which is there in the .h. The actual code is there in the cpp file, which can be separately compiled, right? And that is what usually happens when we say hash include stdio.h. stdio.h is not containing the code for printf, scanf, right? So it's there in somewhere some other file which gets linked into a library, let's say libc.a or libc.so, and that gets linked when you run it with GCC. So for now, it suffices that we are just including the interface, and that interface is sufficient for us to make sure that our code is adhering to the signatures of those functions. Okay. Our hash table class is rather simple now that we know of what all is required. It has a constructor which initializes the hash table array to some array size. In this case, some prime number, in this case 19. And then there is an insertion. If you recall from the slides, we said that there would be two parameters. One is the key, another is the value. In this case, I am not using the value separately. I am using key directly as the value, and therefore I have a single parameter. But in general, you might require both key as well as the value. Similarly, removal with the key and finding with the key are required. And I'm also printing the hash table. Now, what is meant by printing the hash table? In case of linked list, it was okay. I can go over the list and print. In case of binary tree, I can try printing it either in a particular in-order traversal or using a GraphViz format. Or in case of AVL also, I can use GraphViz format and so on, or level order traversal. But in case of hash table, what is meant by printing? Because there is no ordering amongst the elements. So what we do, this print is essentially for us to debug, where each element of the array is actually a pointer to a linked list. So we are going to print each element of the array and what are the elements inside this linked list corresponding to that. That is going to help us visualize how the array looks like, how the hash table looks like, and in case there is a distribution which is going to be skewed with respect to the input elements. For example, are there cells which are empty, which is definitely going to be the case, or are there cells which are going to be having large number of elements? So this thing will become clearer as we look at the print function. There are some private members, for example, the array size and the array of, pointer to the array which we are going to create, and each element of that array is going to be of type list. Okay. And then there is a hash function that given an element E, I am going to make use of that to map the key into an index. That index is returned as an integer. What is element type? Well, element type is not defined here at all. Right? Element type is there inside the list, which we are continuing to use as char. Okay. I think element type we didn't use here. Let me just check. Yeah, we are not using it here. It's actually used only in hash table. So we should probably move it here rather than adding it to the list. Okay. Any questions on the class hash table? Otherwise, we'll look at the function implementations as well as first main. Okay, so let's look at main first, then we'll come back and look at the functions. The main is not difficult. I define a variable of type hash table. Then there is some randomization that I do with respect to the seed of the random function, which uses some time function, and that's why I require that hash includes sys_time.h. Then I'm going to go over I'm going to insert some random set of elements, 10 elements into this hash table. So how do I do that? I use some rand function. Right? Rand mod 100 is going to give me a number from 0 to 99. And I'm inserting that element using ht.insert e. Right? So that e is of type int, so therefore I can have it as the left-hand side of rand function. And once I have inserted all these 10 elements into this array of size 19, I'm going to finally print it. Yeah. So let's look at the individual functions of hash table. So as far as hash table is concerned, we have only used insert and print, but of course you can use the other functions like find and remove. Let's look at the individual functions. The hash function is rather simple. It's just using a mod as the hash function type. So it just takes the integer and mods it with the value of h. So I get a value from 0 to h-1, which is 0 to 18. And I just insert it there, right? So that insertion is not part of the hash. There is only the hash function. Printing of the hash table is element wise. That is, there are entries of this hash table, this ARR, and I go over ARR and I print it. Now, what is this print? This print is from the hash table. What is this print? Yeah, I'll come to Sai Charan's question. Okay, Surya Narayan says that it's going to be list print. So that is correct, because each element of the array is going to be list, and therefore it's the list print which you can use to just print the list. This is also very nice that we are making use of the data structure which we have already created. So now our list data structure is providing service to our hash table, and hash table becomes a client of list. In a similar manner, if somebody starts using our hash table, then hash table becomes a service, and the user who is using, or the program who is using hash table, that becomes the client. So what is the use of a hash table? Any suggestions? Why are we really worrying about this hash table? And we have already learned enough data structures. Why should we worry about hash table? Any suggestions? Okay, Aniruddha says that it's fast. Murari says that searching with lesser absolute time. Shania says efficient search. Okay. Tinja says decrease search time complexity. So if you design your hash functions properly and you are aware of how the applications are, how the application is going to use the elements, then there is a whatever Aniruddha, Mrityunjay, Murari, Shania are suggesting, as well as Surya Narayan, they all are correct that your complexity might turn out to be little lower than even log n. That's possible. You might require larger array, but that's possible. The second aspect is the absolute running time is also much better, because you are dealing primarily with the array. List size typically turns out to be small. That means the number of conflicts will turn out to be small if you have fewer elements and large size of the array, and you use a good distribution with respect to the hash function. That is one. So that is second. So first is time complexity can reduce. The second one is absolute time can reduce. The third one is that not all the elements, not all the types are measurable or countable or comparable, let me put it that way. So in case of AVL and in general binary search trees, we require that there should be comparison possible across elements. Here, even if you have just equality possible, not the I can't compare less than. So I can't say in general that like I was mentioning once, like white is smaller than red, right? So this is something which is not really possible. But if we map, let's say, white to some number and red to some number, then that is going to be possible. So not always this is going to be easy, mapping the element to a particular index or a comparable element. But if you at all want to do that, you can as well use hash table. For example, if you have some string data which is not comparable by the semantic sense, or some other records which are not comparable by the semantic sense, then you can hash that particular record onto an index, right? So you kind of map it to an index, and then the searching becomes possible. So that is another reason why hash tables will be useful. How does hash table make search faster? So if you have a reasonably good hash function which runs in smaller reasonable amount of time, then the number of entries, the number of conflicts in the hash table can reduce considerably, and you can actually prove that it can become as small as number of elements divided by the number of entries in the hash table, right? So the number of elements might be n, but the number of entries you can actually have as a very large value comparable to n. For example, it could be, let's say, n by k, and therefore n upon n by k will become order k. So therefore, it is in your hands, that k is in your hands. So the load factor is going to help you reduce the overall execution time to a very small value. Aniruddha says, does a hash function have to be deterministic? That's a good question. I mean, whatever we know of, it should be deterministic, but I'm just thinking, is there a use case for that non-determinism for hash function? So to understand this question, what he is meaning is that if I tell you a particular value or a key, that is going to always hash map to a particular index, right? This hash function is deterministic. That is, for the same input, you are going to give exactly the same output. But non-determinism can make the same input go to a different index. This I don't know use case for. I mean, I have never seen such a thing. What we have is rehashing, where you can have multiple hash functions and so on, but that all makes it completely deterministic as well. Not completely deterministic, but yeah, you can make it deterministic. So I don't know of a use case where you can use non-determinism, where at a point in time, some key k maps to, let's say, entry 5, and at some other time that key k is going to map to some other memory location, maybe 100. So I don't know where you will be able to make use of this, because then you won't be able to search that particular key. Aniruddha, if you have any specific application in mind, please share. Like if we insert a bunch of keys, hash of key 1 depends on key 2, key 3, etc. So to some extent, this is going to happen, not the exact hash. The hash function continues to remain the same. I mean, whatever I'm not able to probably visualize your application correctly, but what we are going to see in linear probing, for example, is that the particular key 1, let's say, is going to get hashed to a particular bucket, but it might not get inserted there because somebody else is already sitting. So then it might get mapped to some other value. So here the keys are kind of affecting each other, right? So the conflicts are making the key 1 go to some other place than whatever hash of key 1 is. And the order of insertion of key 1, key 2, k3 will change how the hash table looks like. So there is, that's in that sense, there is a little bit of non-determinism if you look at it that way. But still, I would say that this is quite deterministic once you fix the order of the keys. If you don't fix, then it is going to be non-deterministic. Okay, there are more questions. Yeah, sure. Sure, Anil. Yeah. Sai Charan says, so in hash function, we use the hash function to directly get the index of the element we are looking for. Yes, that is what is the use case where we have an array and we get the index of where that element is going to get stored. Typically that is fixed, but then there are variants of hash tables where you might have to, that index is only the first entry. And that entry, if it is occupied by somebody else, you might have to go and search at some other entry for the key that you are looking for. And we'll come to that when we come to linear probing. Murari says, after removing a key from hash, and then if we add according to open addressing, then it will be non-deterministic. Yeah, so if you do not have information about how the elements are getting inserted, that is the ordering amongst the elements, or even, yeah, so from that angle there is non-determinism. But if I give you all the information that these are the keys that are going to get inserted and in this manner, then we lose the non-determinism. So non-determinism is coming because we do not have all the information, right? So which is not really a perfect definition of non-determinism. Non-determinism meaning that I give you all the information. You precisely know how the elements are, how the distribution is, and so on, but you still can't judge where that element is going to get inserted. That is the real non-determinism. So that kind of non-determinism is not there in hash tables. Mrityunjay says, sir, will encryption be non-deterministic? So typically encryption is not non-deterministic. What we do is that there is some sort of a hash. In fact, that is called as a hash, which is provided, which is randomly generated. Yeah, that hash can be randomly generated. Based on that hash, so this hash is similar to, I'll just show you this seed that I'm talking about. This seeding of randomization is like that hash that we talk about in the context of cryptography, where you start with a basic hash. Using that seed or using that hash, it is going to encrypt your key in a particular manner. But given this hash, it is going to be deterministic. If you don't know the hash, then you can say that it is non-deterministic. But again, the non-determinism is dependent on how much information I give you. So it's not, the algorithm per se is not non-deterministic, but if you don't give that information that I don't know what is the hash is going to be, then it is non-deterministic. So the same key might get mapped to index 1, index 2, index 3, or encrypt 1, encrypt 2, encrypt 3, depending upon that hash, depending upon that seed, seed 1, seed 2, seed 3. Okay, but given a particular seed, it is going to be completely deterministic. Right? So think about it this way, that I'm giving you, like we have this usual cipher where I have this hello, right? That gets mapped. I'm just using a simple K-shift cipher, GDKKN, right? So I'm mapping each element of this string to the previous element in the ASCII values, right? Or maybe in a rotation manner where A becomes Z, right? In this case, the function that I'm using, the function I'm using is -1. Now, this, if I hard code this -1, then it becomes completely deterministic function, correct? But if I say that now I'm going to do a -k, and k is getting generated at runtime, then it becomes non-deterministic if I don't give you what the value of k is. So I look at this hash function as a black box, then I don't know the value of k. But if I give you the value of k, then it becomes completely deterministic. I precisely know for this string, this is going to be the output, like that. Any other concerns, questions here? Saicharan says, but how will we decode the encryption? Exactly. These are all one-way functions. So, for example, if I tell you that I'm using mod 10 as the encryption operation, right? So I'm giving you some number which you are encrypting into some other number. So if I give you 11, if I give you 21, if I give you 31, 51, 101, all of these are going to get mapped to the same value 1. Okay. So now so in some sense, all these values 10x plus 1 are going to get mapped to the same encrypted value, which is 1. Now I give you this value 1. Okay, take this encrypted string, which is 1, and now give me back my decrypted value, original ciphertext or original plain text. That is not going to be possible for you. I mean, from 1, I can't go to, I don't know if it is going to be 1 or 11 or 21 or 101 and so on. So these are all called as one-way functions, where you can, I mean, like Abhimanyu, you can go inside, but you don't know how to come outside. So in contrast, the example that I gave where hello is getting mapped to gdkkn, that is a two-way function. If I give you gdkkn and you know what the function was, original function was, that was -1, then I know how to map gdkkn back to HELLO. So that is a two-way function. Most of the functions that we use in practice are one-way functions. But then how do you decrypt really, right? So I give you a password. So I give you a login name and I give you a password. Now, if I just store this mod 10, how do I go back and find out whether my password was correct or not? Any suggestions? This question has come up there. That's why I'm spending a few minutes on this. This is interesting. So how do I figure out whether the password was correct or not? How do I get the original password? Anybody knows any suggestions how to do that? We can check the input string with the hash function. So what does that mean? Okay, so that's correct. So what you can do is you don't need to store the password. So none of these online places where you are going to enter your password, they are not going to store your password in plain text. Right? It's against the cyber rules actually. So they won't store unless they put it in their terms and conditions that we are going to store your plain text and so on. So they are not going to store your plain text. What they will store is actually this mod value 1. But then how do you figure out? Well, you don't need to. You don't need to decrypt the text. What you need to do is that next time somebody logs in, they are going to enter the password, again hash the password and check if you are going to get the same value 1. So what they are going to store is this encrypted value 1 and not the original password, which was, let's say, something else. Right? So they will just check when you next time enter the password, whether that password is again hashing to the same value. Now the problem that Saicharan is mentioning, isn't it then possible that somebody else has another password which is again hashing to the same value? Yes, it is going to be possible. That multiple inputs like we had in the case of mod 1, 11, 21, 101, all of them are mapping to the same encrypted value 1. And therefore, you might get into an extreme situation where two passwords hash to the same value for the same seed. How do you take care of that? Well, the probability helps us here that the strings are sufficiently large, the number of values that it can take. It's not a simple mod function anyway. It's a much complicated function. There are characters which can take 26 values and maybe 26, not 26, right? So you'll have 26 plus 26, 52 plus digits 10, so 62 plus some arbitrary characters, maybe 10 more. So around 72 letters are possible, 72 values are possible for each character. And those combinations, right, at least 6 letters or at least 8 characters in your password, that is going to give you a very, very large range of passwords. And therefore, and in addition to that, there is a login, right? The login name has to be the same. So therefore, there is absolutely in practice zero chance, right? In practice, there is zero chance that two passwords are going to map to the same value in addition to the login. Right? The logins are anyway going to be different. So somebody else will put my login and put some other password, and that will come to the same hash value. This probability is so low that it doesn't happen in practice. Right? I have not heard of any case where this happens in the usual websites that we know of, Facebook, Google, etc. Okay, size and say, but sir, multiple inputs might lead to the same encrypted output. Yes, so that is what I was mentioning, that it will, the probability is so low because of the values. Yes. Any other concerns here? Murari says, so in database, they will store login as key and hash value of the password. Yes. So if you look at, for example, Linux, you will see that in etc there is this passwd file, right, which is going to store your login information, and then there is a shadow file which might store this encrypted text, which does not have everybody doesn't have access to it. I think only the sudo or the root will have access to it. There you will see, I don't know if I have, okay, let me just see, shadow, permission denied. Is there okay, right? So you can see this large value up to the dot is actually the encrypted password, right, for this particular login name, which is Meghna-PC. Right? So this large encrypted string is the one that is getting stored. So when I enter the password, that is going to get converted into this encrypted string. With what hash? The hash value actually is, I think typically the first 2 characters is what I know of. I don't know if it has changed now. The first 2 characters of this encrypted text is actually the seed. It could be more now, I don't know, but earlier it used to be the first 2 letters. Using this seed, I apply a hash function. That hash function is also known, by the way. The hash function is also known. What is the operation that you are going to, like in this case, mod is known, but still if I give you 1, you can't go back to 10, 11 or 21. Similarly, in this case, seed is known. What is the function that I'm using for encrypting? That is also known. Still, you can't go back from this particular string back to the original password, plain text. So this is how it gets stored. Any other concerns? Anything related to cryptography? I have limited knowledge, but I can mention these things too. Good question. I'll leave it for some other day. Yeah, there are ways in which this can be done. For example, first thing is that they maintain a dictionary. Many of our passwords use usual names from the dictionary, right? So many of, yeah, there is a brute force, but that brute force is too slow. Too slow meaning really slow. You are talking about 26, not 26, we counted 72 values per character and 8 characters, right? So this is the password that you can have. How many combinations you will have? 72 into 72 into 72 to the power 8 is a reasonably large value to try out. Right? So yeah, it actually takes several years to actually get into brute force. So the hackers use intelligent heuristics, right? So like we said, that if you have a good distribution over keys, then your hash table might have, I mean, good distribution, then the hash table also distributes nicely. But if there is a skew, then the hash table might have a long chain of these elements occupied the same cell. In a similar manner, most of our passwords are going to have very simple text. In fact, I did something when I was the HPC head. We did some checks on, we also didn't know what the passwords are. So what we did is we checked out of around 900 users, 900 accounts, how many accounts have login name as the password. And we found out that more than 1/3 of the logins have login name as the password, right? So we knew we could crack 1/3 of the logins easily. Then the hackers, what they are going to use this dictionary to have those. So typically, hello is a common password. Hello 123 is another common password. These days there are restrictions with respect to, oh no, you have to have a capital letter or you have to have a special characters and so on. But all of that can be easily encoded. And then you will try these dictionaries and you have some letter in front and then some letter in the letter. So for example, hello 123 becomes capital H E L A small E L L O 123, and that turns out to be a valid password. Or people, instead of 123, they will use shift 123, and that becomes a valid password. So I mean, people want to remember the password also. I don't want to make it so complicated that I myself will not remember. So your name, like Saichand is saying, your birth date, all of that can get utilized as part of the password. And some of you will have such passwords anyway, right? If you have, it's a good idea to change that to something which is not dictionary based, but you'll still remember. Okay, so Basu says Big Basket used SHA-1 to store passwords, and millions of usernames SHA-1 plus salt were leaked. Yeah. In fact, there have been so many leaks around, and you just, whatever I have understood, whatever I know, I mean, in the college days, we have also tried to crack passwords and so on. But what I have understood is that if you are reasonably careful about setting the password for the first time, you are more or less safe, right? So you don't use arbitrary character passwords or arbitrary names. I mean, you can use names which are probably not known in public. Right? So for example, if there is, for example, you can take some string and reorder some of the characters, right? So that doesn't turn out to be forward or reverse. It is not a valid string. Then in that case, it turns out to be reasonable. Anyway, so I think that's a aside. Sorry, sorry if that bored some of you. Let's come back to hash tables. Yes. Yeah. So let me switch off my video. I wanted to explain that with my expression, so I thought I'll switch on the video. Okay, let's come back to the hash table. Let's do that too. Yeah, so we were using the list print, and that is going to come handy for printing the individual lists of the hash table. The constructor is going to essentially store that value h in the class, because we are going to make use of that while hashing, right? So we need that h to be stored somewhere, which we are passing as a parameter to the constructor. And then we also create an array of that size. So new list of h, which is going to, each element of this array is going to be of type list. Insertion is rather simple, and I have maybe made it a little complicated, but it can be simplified, and I'll tell you how to do that. So insert of a particular element is, you just hash that element, get an index, right? So our hashing was just a mod with h. I check if ARR of index.find e is there. Again, this find is not our hash table find, but it is ARR of index.find, which means that is a list find. Again, we are making use of the list ADT. And if it is found, that means that the element is already present in that particular entry, right? So that entry is indexed at index. So if it is present in that list, and it can't be anywhere else, since we are using chaining, we are using a list, that means we are using chaining. That means it can't be anywhere else, so we just return false, that the element is already present. Otherwise, we insert it using list insert and return true. If it so happens, okay, I'll come to this part, how to reduce this. Now let's look at remove. Remove also returns a boolean, that if the element is present, that is, you are successful in removing it, then it is going to return true. Otherwise, if the element is not present, then it's going to return false. So again, I have to depend upon the hash function. And what I'm trying to do is just return whatever is list remove is written for that element. That means that the list removal is actually taking care of checking if the element is present and so on. Is that really happening? Well, we can check that. So remove is actually returning a boolean, and we know from the semantics, and we can look at list.cpp to figure that out. If the element is present, it returns true. If the element was originally not present, then it returns false. So I can make use of that to reduce the functionality in the hash table. Reduce the code size in the hash table, that I just return whatever list removal does. Can I make use of the same in case of insert, where I say this first line int index equal to hash e, and then return ARR of index dot insert e. Unfortunately, what I had done in case of list is that our insertion was returning a void. So it was not giving me enough information about whether the element was originally present or not. If it was not present, it was successfully adding it. If it was present, then it was probably doing nothing. Or there was an assumption that insertion will never result in collisions or something like that. Collisions meaning collisions in the linked list. That is, the same element will not be inserted twice. But this is where the service that is being provided by the ADT starts affecting how you write the code in the client. If this would have been returning, insert would have been returning a boolean, and the semantics would have been as it was, then all these three functions, insert, remove, and find, would have been written in exactly the same manner, and that becomes easier for me to manage as I progress in my software. Right? So because insert had a different signature compared to remove and find, I had to use it in a different way. Okay, this is an important point from software engineering perspective. All right, so we looked at the code. Any questions on the code? Okay, then we are going to compile this program. G++ file name, right? The file name was hash.cpp. Okay, will this compile, not compile? Any suggestions? Okay, nobody wants to suggest anything. Okay, this will not compile. Why is that? Okay, I'll show you the error, and hopefully you'll be able to figure out why that is not coming. Oops. Oh, okay. Sorry about that. G++ /hash. Now, does that ring a bell? Why it is not compiling? अरे सो गए क्या तुम लोग? Why is this code not compiling? Anybody has encountered such errors while compilation? Okay, thanks, Shania. So Shania says that list.cpp is not there. Why? Why do we need it? So far we didn't require. Well, what we have included is only list.h, and we know that the list.h was containing only the function signatures. It was not containing any code corresponding to those functions. I mean, some of these functions like print is available, but many of these functions code is not available. Therefore, whatever we use from the client, these functions, list print, list, find, insert, remove, and so on, these are not, I mean, we are not using find recursive or print recursive. So those are not, the compiler is not cribbing about that. But these functions, there is no code corresponding to them. So then how will the compiler be able to figure out how to link it, right? So these are called as linking related errors. So we need to somehow link it. So how do we specify that? We just say that, okay, I have code in hash.cpp also, and I have code in list.cpp also. I'll show you how the list.cpp is, but let's see if that compiles. Okay, this has compiled fine, and that is where the linking has found out that all the code is available. What does list.cpp do? List.cpp, the first thing it does is hash include list.h, because I have all the declarations of class list into this list.h, and then there is an implementation of all of these functions which we had earlier in our list. Right? So all of these functions, only functions are written here. There is no main. In the whole program, there has to be a single main, which we have already included inside the hash.cpp, and therefore we should not include main in list.cpp. Otherwise, there will be multiple main error given by the compiler. So can't we put all of these functions in list.h? Yes, you can put that, and it will compile fine. Then we don't need to link it with list.cpp. But this becomes a modularization of the code where only the API, only the interface is there in list.h, and the implementation is separate. So we are separating the interface from the implementation, and that becomes a good programming practice. You can change this list.cpp anytime. You can change the underlying implementation, but the client can continue using list.h whose interface remains the same. This we have been seeing as an advantage of ADT, and this sort of implementation where we keep the code separate, that helps us in ensuring that. All right, so we compile the code. Let's run the code now. So we had 19 entries. So the first thing it prints is this empty list created. What is this? Where is this empty list created coming from? Abhishek says 18 linked list. Mrityunjay says number of entries. Who is printing this? We didn't print it from main. Aniruddha says constructor. Basu says in the array. Right. So this is coming from the constructor. We are creating 19 such lists because it's an array of 19 elements, and therefore empty list created must be there in list.cpp's constructor. So if you look at this constructor, this is going to get called 19 number of times, as the number of elements in the array is 19. This is where is the problem with respect to some of the magical things that happen in C++. Many times there are automatically like constructors etc. get called, which might do more work than you can actually imagine, because you are looking at the code. Okay, this is some loop, this is something else, and this is something else. The overall complexity is this much. Right? But yeah, there are things which are happening in background, and if I had a large loop here in the constructor, that complexity also comes into picture when I look at the code, and it's not very evident immediately. You can have operator overloading in C++, where arbitrary things can do inside operators. So if I'm talking about, for example, head equal to null, right? Thankfully, in this case, their equal to operator is not overloaded, but I can overload an equal to operator, not in this case because head is a pointer. But if it would have been a class, then you can overload equal to, and it can do arbitrary things. This tail arrow next, again, tail is a pointer, so you can't overload that. But if it would have been some node which is of class type, that class type arrow something, that arrow can do arbitrary things. You can do whatever code you can write inside that. That is possible in operator overloading. You might see this to be okay, this is a plain statement, just order one. No, that is not the case. So that is where one has to be a little careful. All right, so it printed this part, then it inserted some 10 elements randomly, and then it tried to print the hash table entry wise. So 0 to 18 entries, and in each list, what are the elements that are present, those got printed, right? So in this case, we were very lucky. The elements were such that there was no conflict in the elements. Right? Does that repeat? Well, let's see. If we are lucky the second time, no. There is a conflict here, and those get inserted as multiple elements into the list. All right. Any questions on this code? And you can quickly check if that number h really affects, right? So you can probably change it to some other number, maybe 59. Well, if it's 59, maybe I should increase the number of elements also. Maybe we'll insert some 30 number of elements. Then it will print the empty list created those many number of times, right? So 59 number of times, then I'm inserting some 30 elements. And then if you look at the distribution, now there are more entries which are having some elements, right? So less or fewer entries which are empty. But yeah, I think we have to look at the percentage. But thankfully, despite adding these many elements, we are not having any entry which is having 3 elements in the same row, in the same list. And that's a relatively good sign. And that is where you get advantage because of hash tables. So we inserted 30 elements. So typical rough estimate or a rule of thumb is that you should have approximately 70% of the array to be full, which means that if the array size is n, you should insert 2n by 3 number of elements, or let's say 70% of n number of elements. So in this case, if I have 59 as the number of as the number of entries in the array, then 59 into 70%, right? So maybe around 41, 42 number of elements you should insert, right? If you require more number of such elements, then you should probably make use of a larger array. Sai-Charan says there is no way to know for sure that the table won't be skewed. All entries might enter the same bucket. Yes, theoretically there is no guarantee. I mean, the guarantee that we can give is only probabilistic guarantee. That too based on only the after you have some information about the distribution of elements. If the distribution is uniform, then I can give certain probabilistic guarantee that the values are going to be like this. But yeah, in general, this is all completely data dependent. There is no handle that you have on how the entries are going to be, and therefore you don't have any handle on that. But this is more theoretical. In practice, that doesn't happen. As we saw, these random numbers were generated, but these turned out to be reasonably spread out. So that turns out to be the useful thing in practice. Any other concerns? If you know the values or if you know the distribution, you can do better. If you know the values, for example, those are always going to come from 1 to 100. I know that. So then I can do much, I can compute a much better hash function. All right, so I think we will stop here. There are a couple of minutes, but I think we'll stop here. And then after a couple of minutes, there is a large gap, right? So not this Friday, but I think we are going to meet directly on next Friday. Meanwhile, I'll try to finish your quiz to evaluation, manual evaluation, and you will be able to get your scores, right? So we'll stop here and I'll wait for any questions. Okay, so enjoy this academic break and get refreshed, and then we'll be back with a few weeks of some last data structures. All right, bye then.